Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to Connecting with the Right Investor. My name is Colin Mahan, and I'm a director of programs at the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. And for those of you who may not know, the NASDAQ Center is a nonprofit that's building a better path for entrepreneurs worldwide by improving inclusion, access, and knowledge in entrepreneurship. As you're going to see in the chat in just a moment, the NASDAQ Center provides programs, resources, and exceptional mentorship to entrepreneurs across all races, industries, and geographies. So check out those links and resources in the chat. Now, I've got a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. First off, let us know where you're dialing in from in the chat. See if you've got a neighbor. Secondly, we're going to open up for live Q&A near the end of our discussion, so please submit those questions for us in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen throughout our discussion. We'll try our best to get to them all. Now, none of what we do here at the center would be possible without all the amazing support from our sponsors, including NASDAQ, Lehigh University, BMO, Airbnb, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, BPM, HubSpot for Startups, and Google Cloud. We're humbled by their contributions and hope you're grateful too. All right, so I'm going to launch a few polls to just take a quick temperature gauge on how everyone's doing today. The first one, how are you feeling about your business? Are you optimistic? In a little bit of survival mode? How are you feeling? We use this to drive the wellness and additional resources that we provide for you, the entrepreneurs out there in our community. So let us know. Thank you for voting. Let's see where y'all are coming from. Atlanta. All right, LA, Atlanta. Oh, we got two Atlanta. We got neighbors. Great. From the DMV. Awesome. I'm gonna end this poll. Share those results. Looks like optimism is in the lead, but understand there's a little bit of survival mode anxiety and a little fear out there. So hopefully our discussion today will help with that. So the second poll I'm gonna launch, what's keeping you up at night? We use these points to drive the future topics we're going to be hosting over the next couple months. So let us know where you're at. All righty. Sales looks like it's in the lead. Finance, kind of all over the place. Oh, hello from London. Good evening. Hello from New York City. Good afternoon. All righty. I'm going to end this poll. Share those results. Looks like finance and sales are kind of at a tie, but there's a little bit of marketing and scale, so we'll make sure to take note of that. But good news for you is finance is part of the discussion that we're going to be having today. So without any further delay, please join me in giving a warm welcome to our special guest today. Brian Hollins is a founder and managing partner at Collide Capital. Brian, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Colin.
So stoked to have you. All right, let's jump right in. So you have a pretty unique journey. Can you talk a little bit about how you got to where you are today and a little bit about your background?
Sure. We all have unique journeys. So mine is unique to me, but appreciate everyone joining. And I'll hopefully this can be helpful. Please feel free to drop questions in the chat. I'm here to support any of those spheres: sales, finance, the optimist, the pessimist. Really just looking forward to having a conversation and sharing what I've learned, and hopefully it can be helpful, or some tidbit that you take away can help you in your business or whatever you're trying to achieve. So I'll go back to my origin. I grew up right outside of Washington, D.C. I think I saw a few DMVs in there. I grew up in Rockville, Maryland. I'm the oldest of three boys. I like to brag about my younger brothers when I get a chance. So my middle brother is a wide receiver for the Buffalo Bills. He's been in the NFL for 8 years now. He won a Super Bowl with the Philadelphia Eagles, played for the Dolphins for a few years, jumped around, and walked on in college. So when I think about people being told you can't do something, he's a great reminder of why you keep pushing. And my youngest brother, equally successful, enlisted in the military out of high school, served in the military for 4 years with Special Forces, and then took the GI Bill and graduated from Columbia University last year. And is now off and building his career in technology. I ran about as far away from home as I could. I went to Stanford for undergrad, and then I spent about 6.5 years in the Bay Area working across technology and venture capital. So I started my career at Goldman Sachs. I sat in the asset management division. I learned portfolio management, asset allocation, diversification. Got what's called a CFA, became a chartered financial analyst, and then was tapped to build a new group at Goldman called the Emerging Entrepreneurs Coverage Group. The core thesis of that group was that Goldman does a tremendous job when you're ready to raise $100 million and pretty much does nothing for you before then as an early stage entrepreneur. And so part of my job was to take an Uber to Sand Hill Road and to meet with venture capital firms who were leading technology investments at the seed and Series A stages and help some of their companies break into Goldman Sachs and get access to Goldman's resources. I did that job for about 2.5 years and learned a lot. For those familiar with the venture capital space, learned a lot about what we call the value added side of our job. So what do you do outside of just giving a founder capital? What are the other things you do to support their trajectory? And we might talk about some of that today. And then I joined a group called GS Growth Equity. So I invested out of the merchant banking division off of Goldman's balance sheet for 2.5 years. We supported growth stage companies, so Series B to Series D. And we made $30 to $75 million investments in businesses that were typically doing about $10 to $15 million of revenue. I left the firm in 2019 and went to Harvard Business School. And I spent 2 years at school preparing for my own entrepreneurial journey. Goldman is good at a lot of things. It's not very good at teaching you to be an entrepreneur. And so I spent 2 years at school preparing for building my own venture capital firm. It's here on my sweatshirt, and so it's also in my background. I just realized it's on my Zoom. But I alongside a partner of mine, built a venture capital firm called Collide Capital, and we invest in pre-seed and seed stage, predominantly diverse and underrepresented founders, building fintech infrastructure, supply chain and logistics software, and productivity software. And so we've been doing that work now for a little over 5 years. And so super excited to chat about any of those topics, all those topics, how I got here. But that's a little bit of my journey to where I am today.
Amazing, Brian. And I'm sure Thanksgiving is pretty interesting at your house, considering your makeup of your brothers.
Very, very, very proud of our, we all have had very different journeys, but all have been successful in our own rights. And I think we grew up with a discipline that allows you to be successful no matter what kind of path you want to take. We all work very hard at whatever our craft is and work hard at honing our individual craft. And so I think that there's some common traits that can make you successful no matter what you're trying to achieve.
Oh, I love that. We're probably going to dig into some of that, but you mentioned the value add part of investment that you did at Goldman. So what are some of the key characteristics to look for in an investor beyond the financial backing, and how should entrepreneurs evaluate this strategic guidance and support an investor can offer on the value add side?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind there is beggars can't be choosers. Some people might not want to hear that, but the reality is until you're in a position to be choosing between different investors, oftentimes I'd say green money is good money. And so you obviously need to be careful that you're not taking on terms that are onerous or that are predatory. And so, whether that's lick preferences, and so preferred equity versus common, are there certain terms that could potentially make you lose, control of your business? There's things like that you need to look out for. There's reputational risk. You don't want to work with an investor who has a poor reputation. But in general, I'd say in the early days of building a business, you want to find partners that are aligned to your industry and what you're trying to build. Someone who you're not explaining the industry that you're trying to build in. So if you're building something for a healthcare space, don't go to a climate tech investor. If you're building something for B2B software, don't go to a consumer investor. And so really spend some time learning, who has invested in and around this space in the past, because oftentimes those are the people that will not just give you capital, they'll also make customer introductions, they'll also open up their network, and they'll also have a perspective on how your business is going to perform. So they've probably seen around some corners and have a decent idea and understanding of what it takes for you to be successful. So I'd say industry expertise is certainly one piece. And then the second is, what we call operational support. So, identifying investors who have done the job before, people who have built businesses, people who have scaled businesses. Oftentimes as early stage entrepreneurs, you're coming into a role for the first time. You might have an incredible idea, but you've never actually taken that idea from 0 to 1, which is what we call it. So, finding operational support and finding, investors that have platform offerings or investors that have resources that can guide you on the journey is super important in those early days.
Yeah. And you talked about industry and operational alignment, but how do entrepreneurs, because we talk a lot about how values from the entrepreneurial perspective are really important when thinking about partners, team, investors. So, how do entrepreneurs determine which investors align best with their vision, values, and objectives?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think we do a lot of work studying and assessing businesses. And one of the things I appreciate about some of the best founders in our portfolio is that they do the same work on us. And so oftentimes when you're waiting for an investor to make a decision, you're kind of sitting on your hands waiting for them to say yes or no. And I think some of the best investors actually flip that due diligence process back on the investor. And so they ask me, hey, I want to talk to 3 or 4 companies in your portfolio. I'd like to meet with a few of the founders and ask what it's like to work with you. I want to attend an event or two in your ecosystem to see what type of people you attract. I want to read about the mission statement and kind of history of your firm to see how it's evolved over time. I've even had someone ask me to introduce them to an employee who's either been fired or left the firm. And I thought that that was a really unique kind of way to better understand alignment of values because over time, it's easy to put a website together and say we do this and here's our pillars and we love diversity, but those through lines should exist at more than just the GP level. It should start to show up in your employees. It should start to show up in your founders. It should start to show up in the people that you attract to your ecosystem. And so I think that's a great method and mindset to have when you go into an investor diligence process is to sort of ask the same of them that they're asking of you. Now, be careful not to ask for too much, let them get through their diligence process and make sure that they're aligned and interested in the business that you're building. But I actually found it quite refreshing when founders were spending the time to get to know our business and making sure that we were culturally aligned with the ethos of what they were trying to build long term. Because the reality is this is a long-term relationship that you're setting up. We joke at the firm that neither of my partners are married, but we're sort of married to each other. We've signed up to be together for a minimum of 15 years through the work that we're doing with building Collide. And so you really want to take a slow and steady approach to how you build partnerships because those investors will be the people that you call on Monday morning and call on Friday afternoon and call when things are great and call when things are terrible. And so you want to make sure that they're aligned to the values and North Star that you're trying to achieve.
Awesome. And any advice for entrepreneurs when they are doing this assessment and they find that there isn't a right fit?
Yeah, I think open communication, identifying, again, this is I hope that this is the case for some of the folks that are joining this call is that, you have 3 or 4 investors that offer you a term sheet or, suggest that they want to invest in your business where you're in a position to actually turn down capital based on a lack of alignment. I think that's a really challenging fork in the road to cross is some people might only have one potential investor. And in that case, you kind of got to ask yourself, how far off are they from alignment with you? I can tell you we have 71 investors in our firm. Not all 71 of those investors are perfectly aligned with the world that I want to see. That doesn't necessarily make them a bad investor, right? And so you kind of want to ask yourself, how far off are they and in what regards are they off? And is it something that you can deal with and manage? And if so, make sure that you bring those conversations to the table so that they understand sort of where you stand and that over time, hopefully you can work together to get to a better place.
That's great advice. And so you talked about the marriage that is the 15 plus year relationship, because even if after there is an exit, I'm sure there's a lot ongoing relationship, other businesses to build, other businesses to invest in.
Yeah.
But you mentioned some of that strategic guidance. So how should founders balance investor interests at the boardroom or just in general with the needs of and expectations of other stakeholders like customers, partners, team?
You have to do it all. Uh, there's not there's not a great, on Mondays I ignore my investors and focus on my customers. On Tuesdays, I focus on my customers and ignore my employees. I mean, it's really a balancing act. I'd equate it to kind of spinning plates. At any given time, if I start to feel like my investor plate is spinning so fast, it probably means I'm about to drop another plate. And so part of your job as founder, CEO, or in my case, managing partner and GP of the firm, is to balance those different stakeholders within the business. Oftentimes one of the mistakes we see founders make, as well as some of our peers in the venture capital ecosystem, is that they will fundraise, they'll raise the money, and then they'll completely ignore the people that gave them money until they need to go ask them for money again. And that's a horrible, horrible way to approach fundraising and investor relations. Instead, what we like to do is think of it as a customer success funnel. So it doesn't mean that you need to be touching them all the time, but you should be checking in with them. You should be giving them progress reports. You should be telling them not just about all the success stories, but also the challenges. Because in general, what you will find is investors like being engaged in helping your business succeed, right? And so if you have challenges, not raising your hand and not asking for support is actually a really dangerous way to go about building your business. If you think that your investors assume that everything's going perfectly just because your newsletter says everything's going perfectly, it's actually oftentimes erodes trust. And so we look at it as an opportunity, whether it's through our customers, challenges that we might be, if I was building a company, customers, the challenges that our product might be facing, if it's employees, challenges that we might be facing on the fundraising side or on a cultural side, or investors, challenges that we might be facing on some of the aspects in regards to kind of the growth of the firm. So I really do think it's a balancing act. There's no perfect way to manage it all, but I think having those close touch points, over communicating and making sure that they feel like they have a way to get to you when they have questions or when they have concerns is super important. And in this day and age where there's a lot more of this, there's a lot more of Zoom instead of in person, I think it's even more important to realize that, your investor, you are likely not the only company in that investor's portfolio. They probably have 10 to 15 to 20 to hundreds of other companies in the portfolio. And so you need to stay top of mind. You need to stay relevant. And so over communicating is a great way to do that. And I think it helps ensure that all of those key stakeholders feel aligned and sort of supported by the business.
That's great. And speaking of the communication streams, how can entrepreneurs maintain and nurture relationships with investors even when they aren't immediately seeking money?
Yeah, this is something that I watch some founders completely fail at, and some founders are really good at. And so we have what we call drip campaigns. So for some of you that might be familiar, or those that aren't, a drip campaign is effectively a way to keep low touch points with interested parties. So in my case, as a GP, when I'm going out to meet investors, these investors can be high net worth individuals, they can be corporations, they can be fund of funds, they can be foundations, they can be endowments. There's a lot of different groups that invest into venture capital firms. We probably get 150 no's for every 3 yeses in our business. And we only fundraise every 2.5 to 3 years. And so in that meantime, in the 2.5 years in between our fundraising, we are constantly meeting that next 150. And it's not necessarily that we're sending them the same update that we're sending the 3, meaning we're not sending them the exact details on our businesses or exactly how things are performing, but we're giving them regular updates to make sure that they are able to track the journey and success of our firm. So as our firm adds new employees, we celebrate that with them. As our firm adds new portfolio companies, we celebrate that with them. As our firm faces challenges, we raise our hand and ask if they have support and guidance. And I think what you can learn through that process is when you then go back to fundraise, you have a pretty good sense of who's engaged and interested with what you're trying to do. And so if you have 150 people, there's probably 25 of them who respond to your emails, congratulate you on the new employee, give a suggestion if you have a challenge that you're facing. That's the group that you want to go to first when you go to fundraise, because they might not have been a good fit at the time, but that's not a you thing. That might be a them thing. They might have been out of money. They might have had a board member change that meant they couldn't invest. There's a variety of things that happen. And I think sometimes founders spend a little too much time in their own ego and they get in their own way and they say, well, those guys said no to us, so I'm not checking in with them anymore. I don't like those guys. I think you need to step back and realize it doesn't take everyone for you to be successful. You only need a handful of people to support you and believe in you in order for your business to get off the ground. And so use that check-in time, use that cadence of kind of soft touch and drip campaign as a way to just keep people up to date on what you're building, because you never know who will come out of the woodworks down the road. We had multiple investors who we sort of had marked as a zero in our probability funnel, who ended up being investors. And I think it was in large part because they felt that the level of communication that we offered and the level of kind of granularity into the business that we were building was something that they wanted to see in their portfolio. And so I think that's something that's extremely important for founders to do. I don't care if it's a monthly newsletter. I don't care if it's a weekly text. Find ways to keep close touch points to the people that you want to engage, even if you're not fundraising at that time.
It's great advice. And I think, many folks on this call and just in the ecosystem in general, like may not have access to those key relationships. So any advice around networking, leveraging your own network to connect to investors?
Yeah, we'll start with this since everyone joined this call. I'm Brian at collidecap.com. So if you want to shoot me an email, I'm happy to be your first investor. I can't invest in every company that gets sent to me. We look at about 1,000 companies and make somewhere between 1 to 2 investments. So just to give people perspective on how many investments we make, but relative to the number of opportunities that we look at. I think there's a couple of different other places I would recommend. I think industry conferences and industry events are pretty under attended. And what I mean by that is, like, if you work in the healthcare space, there's a ton of healthcare ecosystem events that you could go to that, prior to COVID were slammed, and then COVID happened and they turned virtual. And then the version that they built after COVID was maybe not as exciting or didn't have the same number of sponsors. And so instead of it being at, a cool hotel, it was instead at a community center. That's the exact type of events you want to be going to. You want to be going into rooms where there's less people than there used to be. Oftentimes the same decision makers are in those rooms, but there's far less opportunities showing up. And so I think just raising your hand and sort of being proactive in terms of getting out there in the ecosystem and actually showing up is something that I tend to believe is it's a little like out of style right now. And I think anytime there's something that's out of style like that, it actually turns into a great opportunity. I think LinkedIn is another really underutilized platform. And I don't necessarily mean LinkedIn in terms of looking for jobs or applying to jobs, but really starting to build your voice on LinkedIn. So if you have a perspective on an industry, or you have a perspective on a company or idea that you want to build, really building out your LinkedIn and using your voice on LinkedIn to kind of find other like-minded people or people who are interested in what you're building, I think is a super valuable tool. And so, for folks, if you have, 150 or 200 connections on LinkedIn, I'd challenge you to get that to 1,000, and I think a lot of people say, well, I don't know 1,000 people. Well, I'm of the belief, and everyone might not agree with me on this, I actually don't think you need to know everyone on your LinkedIn personally. I think you can, over time, slowly get to meet more people. I use LinkedIn as a networking tool. So I will meet new people on LinkedIn. People will message me. It doesn't mean that I add everyone who adds me on LinkedIn, but I'll read the message that they send me. So also, if you're reaching out to people, add a note. Hey, I'm thinking about building this company. I saw your background. It's super impressive. Here's my email address. I would love to find 30 minutes to tell you more about it. Just being engaging, not being too over pressing or overbearing and selling them something in LinkedIn message. Very, very few investments are made in a LinkedIn DM. And so don't oversell what you're doing, but, just have a conversation. And I think that's a really underutilized tool. And then the third that I would use is, I think alumni bases are really underutilized. And so to the extent you went to a college or university, or, are part of other professional networking kind of ecosystems, tapping back into your alumni databases and seeing, who has built things in these ecosystems that I'm trying to break into, who has rised in the ranks into roles that could potentially help me find and land an opportunity. And I think alumni databases are super underutilized. So you might have to reset your password. It might take you a minute to find your old login, but I think that if you graduated 10 years ago or 40 years ago, alumni databases and alumni ecosystems are still available to you. And so, I'd encourage you to check back in on those and see what you could find.
Great. And talking a little bit about some of like the networking opportunities in person, LinkedIn, just reaching out to alumni bases via email. How do you, what's the best advice that you have around creating a hook, right? Like we all get so many messages on LinkedIn of like somebody who wants to like paint my house, like but I don't own a house. So there you go. Like any advice on getting a hook to get somebody's attention quickly?
Um, I would ask yourself, what is your value prop? For that painter that messages you. Let's say you do have a house. I don't, what like the first thing is like identifying your what we call ICP, ideal customer profile. So you are clearly not the ICP of that painter, but let's assume that painter did find their ICP. Of the thousands of people that could paint my house, what is the thing in 3 sentences that you could do to make me believe you are the exact person who's supposed to do it? Is your paint a better color or, brought in from somewhere else that no one else has access to? Do you do it cheaper than anyone else within a 50-mile radius of my house? Will you start tomorrow and have it done by the next day? Like, what is the one thing that you do that no one else that's in my LinkedIn inbox can do? That's the first thing I'd say. So value prop, I think, is super important. The second thing is what I think of as like traction or proof of concept. So have you painted 100 other houses and done that exact thing? Have you been there the next day and said, I'm not going to paint your house tomorrow for the first time. I have painted 100 houses the next day based on someone saying yes. And here are testimonials of that. So can you use other people to support you in this kind of pitch? And I think testimonial and customer success stories and case studies are a phenomenal way to get people excited or over the hump on the fact that you're coming to them cold. The third, I think, is having balanced communication. And what I mean by that is like, I think there's a difference between the painter who's broke and is dying to paint your house because they need money versus the painter who loves their craft and is looking forward to painting your house if you believe that they are the right fit for you. And so I think like, especially in written communication, having this balance between not too pushy, but also very proud of the product you have and the value prop and the solution of why why you deserve to exist as a business, I think is super important. And so, that's a handful of things. I think it's just for a lot of people, it's like learning to get over no's is really, really hard, and that's something I've just been very fortunate in my career to understand how business works in regards to the acceptance of failure and not looking at it necessarily as a bad thing. We will oftentimes we will go back to investors after they say no to us and ask for 2 or 3 things that we could have done better ahead of coming back to them for the next fund. And we always say that, by the way. We always say, it's a bummer that we couldn't get you guys invested this time, but we really look forward to talking to you next fund. Next fund is 2.5 years away. So like, just think about that. If you're an investor and I say to you, I really look forward to coming back to you at the next fund, there's already some unconscious bias in your mind that says this person is so confident that they are going to exist in 3 years from now that they are already telling me they look forward to kind of revisiting this in 3. So I'm just sort of naturally incentivized to help support them on that journey versus the 8 out of 10 that come to them and say, why'd you guys pass? This doesn't make sense. Why would you invest in their thing and not ours? Ours is better. that's just not the way to carry yourself in such a competitive environment like the one we live in today. And so, really having what I call balanced communication, I think is another super important aspect of it.
I love that. And speaking of balance, we've got a lot of optimists in the room, as we saw earlier,
Yeah.
which is in line with the entrepreneurial journey in general.
Yeah.
But how would you balance optimism versus realism when communicating this, your path, your vision, where you're going, where you are?
Yeah. I like to say this is a great example of something that you should test in the waters, meaning you should have some examples where you say, hey, we're doing this, but it's still pretty early. You're not really sure how it's going, but would love to get your take on it versus, hey, this is growing really fast. We're probably going to be done fundraising in the next couple of weeks. Let us know if you're interested. And just sort of seeing which of those resonates more with investors. I think there's, again, similar to some of the questions you've asked me earlier, like there's just not a right answer. I don't think at any given time you could go off in the corner and only do one of these versions. You sit around and be negative and pessimistic every time you reach out to someone, or you're overly ambitious and overly optimistic and you tell everyone you're going to go 50x over the next 5 years and you're going to have $100 million business. Like both of those are wrong. So it's probably somewhere in between the two. And I like to say, this is why we reach out to so many people. This is why we send so many cold emails. It's because it gives us the opportunity to test and iterate and learn from these different strategies. And so I use a tool called Superhuman. Superhuman is it's an inbox tool so for anyone who has Gmail. I actually think they have a Microsoft Outlook version as well. But if you're familiar with Excel has a lot of shortcut functions. And so you basically only, at least experts in Excel, only use their keyboard. They don't really use their mouse. Superhuman has similar functionality. And so you can get through your inbox really without touching your mouse. And so there's a lot of shortcuts and transcripts that I'll effectively set up, similar to kind of how you would set up a signature in Gmail. And so they're just different versions of the same message, which is, hey, I would love to talk to you about investing in what we're doing. But the tone and the ethos and kind of how I approach them is dramatically different. And I sort of have an aggressive, a moderate, and a shy. And I'll try these out on different types of investors. And, I'll try 3 different ones on family offices. I'll try 3 different ones on endowments. And I think over time, you just learn, you gather perspective on how to do this and you iterate. And so iterating and not being too honed in on any one version of how to do this, being flexible in your mindset around how to engage different investors is super important, because what works for one group, I promise you, will not work for another, and vice versa. And you just have to be comfortable with that. You just have to understand that that's part of the fundraising journey.
Yeah, I've heard some people call this the shampoo, rinse, and repeat method. Test
That's
and
right.
learn.
That's right. That's right. Exactly.
And so you talked about a little bit of your fundraising journey earlier, with the, 100 outreach, 3, actual lands. So what do you do personally when getting those 97 no's? Like, how do you lift yourself up after getting them? Is there anything like personally that you do for yourself other than, what you were talking about in terms of follow-up?
Yeah, it's funny. I've learned, like, dust yourself up and try again. Like, as soon as I get a no, I immediately send another outreach. So that's actually just a personal one for me. And, again, some people just stomach no's harder than others. When I get a no, it's on to the next one. And you also have to, I'd encourage you, if you're getting no's, to treat them all the same. That's very hard to do, but oftentimes what will happen is you have one group who you don't really care about or didn't really think that they were going to convert anyways, and they say no, and you kind of move on and you send the next email and you keep moving forward. And then you have a group that spent 3 weeks with you and you were really excited and they were really excited and it looked like it was going to happen, and then they say no and you're gutted and you spend 2 weeks in bed. And, like, to me, that's the miss. The miss was the opportunity to treat that no just like every other no, because the reality is, in that 100 and 100 and I think we said 100, so in that 97 no's, it doesn't matter which one was closest. They all were no. And so try to learn from them, right? Similar to what I said earlier, solicit feedback, and also keep in mind, not everyone will give you feedback, at least not honest feedback. And so when you do go to solicit feedback, just acknowledge that of the 97, maybe 20 will give you feedback that's worth anything. And so I think I'd encourage you to solicit that feedback from as many as possible, because the hit rate and conversion is not as high as I personally wish it was. Oftentimes when someone says no, they sort of give up on caring about what you're doing. And so
Mhm.
just try not to take those no's personally, move on, encourage yourself to continue battling. I look at all of these as kind of short sprints within a marathon. Like, you need to get the fundraise done, but once you get the fundraise done, you're kind of about to start another fundraise. You're never just going to be done fundraising unless your name's Jeff Bezos. I think even Jeff Bezos fundraises. So that should give you perspective on the fact that you're just going to, fundraising is a part of growing a business. If your business starts to succeed, you will continue to fundraise. You will add employees, you will add products, you will add, a host of different things that will most likely, until the business is incredibly profitable, you will continue to raise money. And that's a good thing. You should look at it as a good thing. And so I wouldn't say learn to love fundraising, but learn to look at fundraising as a component of your job, and stop looking at it as such a necessary evil and something that you're so frustrated in doing, because I think that can show up in your pitch. It can show
Mm.
the way that you show up to meetings. People can feel that energy really easily. At least I can when I meet with founders. And so make sure that you show up with excitement and enthusiasm around what you're doing, and just appreciate that fundraising is one of the components of being founder and CEO. If you don't like fundraising, you should go work for someone else, because founder and CEO is a client facing and external facing role. And there's risk involved with being the lead of a business, the leader of the business. And I think it's super important to learn to appreciate the fact that fundraising is what allows you to go and do all the other things that you're excited about bringing to life.
And you talked a lot about, Brian, you talked about a bit about the feedback loop. And so do you have any creative ways of asking for feedback minus the would love to hear any feedback on why you didn't invest? Like that's that like one line. Like how do you actually get their attention and get a little bit of actual feedback versus, it's just not the right time, not the right fit, not the right stage.
Yeah. I do have a couple. So I'll give you my key ones. One is I go to the most junior person on the team. And so oftentimes the most junior person on the team is the one who kept the most notes, or didn't really have an opinion, or sometimes even liked what we were doing, but didn't have enough of a say to change the mind of the team. And so I will go to the most junior person and solicit feedback. Another thing I will do is try to identify those people in the wild. And so if I know that I'm going to see them at an event coming up, or I know that they're going to be somewhere, I'll try to catch them in person and be appreciative. I'll walk up to them and say, "Hey, bummer that we didn't get there, but really enjoyed the process and learning about what you guys do. Yeah, anything that we could work on? Is there anything that in particular you think we should start to work on as we get ready for the next stage?" And then the last one, and I think this one is pretty slick, is I will use other people to solicit that feedback for me. And so if I know other investors who know those investors, I'll ask them to spend a little bit of time trying to figure out why they didn't get there. And oftentimes, similar to how I might share feedback on a company with another VC firm, they will oftentimes share feedback with other investors. And so those are three different ways that I think in general, if you don't want to use those three, send them an email and just see what they say. But I think through those four mechanisms, I usually find some piece of feedback that we can iterate on and improve the business.
That's great advice. Well, I got one last question. I want to jump into Q&A because Brian wanted to take as many of your questions as possible, y'all. But so Brian, you fundraised a bunch.
Yeah.
So what have you learned from your own fundraising journey that you wish you knew when you got started?
Um, it takes 2 times longer than you think. Um, and what I mean by that is, like, a successful case takes 2 times longer than you think. And so I think founders and similar in my case, kind of investors who are raising money, um, they lose momentum even when things from an outsider perspective are actually trending in the right direction. And so a good example, founders think it should take 3 months to fundraise. On average, it takes 8 to 12 months to fundraise. And so somewhere around that 4 month mark, they will say, "This isn't working. I'm giving up. And, I'm just going to take a few more meetings and see how it goes before I start yelling at everyone." Instead, in month 4, that's when your deck should be getting perfect. Because in month 6 and 7 is when you're finally going to start to have meetings with people who are really excited about what you're doing because you've iterated on your story. You've figured out how to articulate what it is that you do differently than other people. You've prepared your mind around how to get through these investor meetings with stamina. Your data room is most likely in a better place because you've solicited feedback and understood what was missing or what should be changed. And so like right when most people start to walk instead of run or take their foot off the gas or whatever anecdote you want to use, that's when you should be accelerating. And I think that that's something that I've learned through my time is look at fundraising as a marathon, not a sprint. Really just appreciate the fact that fundraising is a core component of the job. It's not something you do from January to March and then never do again. It's a core component of the job. You should always be building relationships with investors. You should always be keeping them engaged. We talked about the newsletters and the different touch points earlier. And so I think that that's something that I wish I knew and that I still practice today. There are still, you're right, we've been successful and have been able to raise capital, but we're still building relationships with people who say no to us because we're going to be back fundraising in 2027. Like I'm already thinking about our 2027 pipeline. And because I'm doing that today, it's not nearly as painstaking. I'm not doing it with such a sense of urgency or a rush or feeling any type of way about it. I'm just doing it authentically. I'm finding ways to engage with these people so that when we wake up in 2027, I'm in their CRM as a 3-year relationship at that point, and as a group that they've gotten to know and a group that they've started to respect or admire. I think another component is it's important to build a team. And whether that's employees because you can afford them, or advisors because you can't afford employees, or family members who just are bought into the vision that you have. We like to say that companies aren't built by individuals, they're built by teams. And I wholeheartedly believe that, and I think in times like this where access to capital is really, really difficult and really challenging, specifically for underrepresented founders, Black, brown, female-led teams, you really need to surround yourself with people that are bought into your vision, because there are really tough days. There are days where even I don't want to send one more email after I get a no, but really relying on those people to kind of pick you up, I think is super important. And so I think some founders, unfortunately, get a little too, they get carried away with this notion that they can't share their idea because someone's going to steal it. The reality is someone is most likely already building the thing that you're building. And so instead, what you need to be thinking about is how you expand your vision as quickly as possible to people that care and people that matter. And so I'd encourage you to build a team and an ecosystem of people around you who can support you, because I wish I knew that a little bit earlier in our journey. Is now we really do have a team of people that are excited and motivated to support us. And I wish we had started that as early as day one.
Great advice. All right, team. Well, it's time for Q&A. So we got a bunch of great questions. Keep them coming for Brian. We'll try to do a lightning round, Brian, to get to as many of these as possible.
I'll try to get through them quick.
Amazing. All right. Well, can you please talk a little bit more about your requirements for pre-seed? Most VCs nowadays say pre-seed, but move to the goal of using requirements for seed and Series A.
Sure. The reality is there are no requirements for pre-seed. That's why it's called pre-seed. I think I hear a little bit in that question frustration from someone who might be trying to raise money ahead of really having a product that's demonstrated, any form of momentum within a customer base or any form of momentum within product iteration. And so I would encourage you, if you're feeling like the pre-seed bars are moving on you, to think deeply about why you have a right to exist. Whether that's the team around you. So spending a little more time highlighting the background of the team, the experience of the team, the things that the team has accomplished in the past that make you all the best possible team to back. I would also encourage you to look around the ecosystem, put yourself in the shoes of a venture capitalist and say, I have this deck and I've also opened 20 other decks this week that look similarly. Why is this the company that we're going to invest in? So what do you do differently? What do you offer that maybe no other company could offer? So do you have IP that's protected? Do you have a team that's differentiated that comes from another company that no one else could possibly recreate? Do you have customer insights that are so valuable that no one else is able to attach them? And then I think the third is keep at it. I think you are right in saying that the bar has moved, but the bar has moved for everyone. So the seed stage founder who raised the pre-seed round that you're talking about and is now at 500K of ARR is having people tell them that they can't raise their Series A until they are at 2 million of ARR. And that used to be 1 million of ARR. So I would encourage you to not be frustrated by the environment and instead think about the things that you can do to better position your business to be successful. Because the reality is there are absolutely still pre-seed rounds getting done. There are absolutely seed stage round getting done. There's absolutely A's getting done, but it's a higher bar, and there should be a higher bar, to be completely honest with you. I think that there were a lot of businesses built in the last 3 years because we were in a zero interest rate environment and because money was effectively free. And so companies were getting funded that shouldn't have been funded, that had no proof of, really right to exist. And so I'd encourage you to continue honing in on your right to exist and why your team is so specifically positioned to be the best company in that space.
Great advice. Another question here. I've heard this countless times of entrepreneurs within our network and just across the ecosystem that are getting interest from a ton of investors but can't find a lead. So any advice on how to find the right lead investor or convince somebody to become the lead?
Yeah, leads are hard. That's true. Oftentimes in this environment, I'll give a good example. When a company is raising $4 or $5 million, there's a bunch of people that want to do 250K or 500K and won't do it until there's a $3 million check. And so I think if I were to give you advice, if you are struggling to find a lead, I would give all of the same advice that I just gave to the pre-seed question, which is, what is your right to exist? Lead investors are not making 10, lead check investments a year. They're probably making 3 to 4. And so why are you the one company that they're going to invest in this quarter? The second piece of advice is to meet more of the team. And so to the extent possible, I would try to find different stakeholders at that firm who you could potentially spend time with. This is a tricky balance. And so I also want to encourage you to be careful not going around the back of the person that you're talking to. But oftentimes when you're looking for a lead investor, that person needs to bring this lead opportunity to their investment committee. And the process of getting a lead check across the line versus hey, let's do 500K because these other firms are doing it. It's a very different process. And so having more people, think about them sitting around a, big wooden table and making a decision as a group of 10. You want to be able to have 3 or 4 people advocating for you in that room. And so maybe that doesn't mean emailing everyone on the team, but are there events that that they will be at? Does that venture firm hold their own events? Could you go to their events and meet more of the team? So finding ways to get a little bit closer to the team and not just the person that you met, I think is super important. And then the last piece I would add is continue to demonstrate traction in the business. So if you met that potential lead investor in January of this year, you should have sent at least 3 updates, in my opinion. It's June 27th. Yeah, it's the end of Q2. You should have sent an end of Q1 update. You should have an end of Q2 update ready to go. And you should have sent some type of update along the way that said, hey, we have 3 or 4 groups that are super excited in what we're doing. Here's their names if they were open to letting you share their name. Or, we have 2 or 3 customers that were in pilots and they just converted to paid customers. And here's how we got them hooked on what we're doing. And we had a V2 of our product get released. And here's some of the feedback that we heard from potential customers. Or we just hired an incredible VP of engineering. Here's their bio and here's where they come from. Would love to get you on the phone with them if you're interested in learning more about how they think. So find different engagement points outside of just, hey, give us money, hey, give us money, hey, give us money, that can get that founder excited about working with you.
Awesome. Another question here. This is an interesting one. What questions should we ask VCs to help us know if they're serious about writing checks or not?
What questions should you ask VCs?
Yeah, like I guess they're saying, nowadays they're more VCs out there not deploying but continue to take meetings. So I
Yeah.
guess like, yeah, how do they figure out quickly whether or not it's real or not?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think I'll just zoom out for a second and just give feedback because I sit in two seats. I sit in a seat as an investor for these companies that are talking about it, but I also sit as an entrepreneur that has to go raise money. So I actually do both of these jobs. And what I would say is, um, it is VC's jobs to meet companies that they're not going to invest in. And so sometimes I think you can feel frustrated by someone doing their job. And I don't think you should be frustrated by that. I think it is your job to protect your time, right? And so you should be qualifying investors. So when they reach out and say that they want to take a meeting, you should ask why. If you're building in healthcare and it looks like they only do consumer, ask what healthcare investments they've made in the last 2 years. If you're building a CPG business, ask what retailers they know where they could potentially provide customer introductions. um, use a little bit of the back and forth engagement before you get on a call, because I think it does two things. One, I think it helps you better qualify. So hopefully you'd be less frustrated with taking these meetings that you don't want to be taking. But two, I think it actually builds a level of respect, and like I mentioned earlier, I actually appreciate when founders do diligence on me. When I jump on a call, one of my favorite ways to start is, hey, I checked out your website and I thought these couple investments that you guys made recently were interesting. Can you help me get a little perspective on why you guys invested there? And I think that can help you unravel how those investors think and get you a little bit closer to an understanding of why they may or may not make an investment in your company.
Mm, great advice. All right, these we're just rolling in. Thanks, everybody.
Cool.
So what I think you talked a little bit about this, but I want to double click on it. What is it that investors look for in very early stage companies? So they're in prototype, pre-customer, pre-revenue, and especially if you're a solo founder who's had an average journey so far.
Um, I would encourage you not to say that you've had an average journey.
I
So
was
the
gonna say
first,
that. I was gonna say that. He probably had a great journey.
Yeah, well, I would encourage you to think about what is not average about your journey. So, what unique things have you done in your career that no one else has done, right? And so, what connection of lines can you point to that suggests that the next line is the right one for this investor to be excited about? That's the first thing I would say. The second is, I would look for ecosystem and community if you feel that way. So, if you feel that your journey is average, go find a co-founder that you think is exceptional. Go find someone who you can bring along in this journey who has a different skill set or a complementary background so that the two of you, can go out in a 1 + 1 = 3 type of experiment. Um, because as far as I'm concerned, owning 10% of $1 billion company is worth a lot more than owning 100% of a $2 million company. And so you should go out with an abundance mindset and say, hey, I have this great idea. I'm not necessarily sure I'm the perfect person to build it. Certainly not the perfect person to build it alone. So what are my gaps? Right? We do what's called network gaps analysis with some of our founders. What are the different experiences that you haven't had in your career that you could go and fill with other people who have had those experiences? And so, to go to the earlier part of the question, we tangent a little bit. I'd really think about what the team composition is. When you're looking at a pre-seed investment, there's no product to look at, there's no customers to look at, there's no revenue to kind of qualify. And so we spend a ton of time looking at the team composition. Why is this team the only team in the world that can build this solution?
Yeah, we talk a lot about, and we've had a bunch of VCs, angels talk about founder market fit. But Brian, I think you just came up with a new one, team market fit.
Team market fit.
There you go. There's a couple of questions here around your drip campaigns and the communications with people that you've been talking to. So, at what stage, I think is like the main theme that people are trying to hear. Like, when should you start these? Is there such thing as being too early when starting the drip campaigns?
Never too early. And the reason I say that is because you should build opt-in, right? So when you're on a call with an investor, if they say no or they say too early, say, hey, really appreciate that. One, solicit feedback, see if there's some feedback. And then two, say, hey, do you mind if I keep you updated on our investor list? I have never in my life said no to that question. Never one time. Now, if you then email me twice a week, I'm gonna look for an unsubscribe button. But in general, think about the cadence. I wouldn't do more than monthly. And then think about being short and sweet. Be concise, be to the point. Nobody wants to read your 19 paragraph update on, the 3 different product iterations you made. Give an update on your team if you've added new people. Give an update on the product roadmap if you've made some key wins. Give an update on fundraising if you've been able to bring in some dollars. Give a quick and concise update on where the business is headed, and then give people the chance to opt out, right? And so slowly over time, you shouldn't feel bad about if that group starts to grow, because if people didn't want to listen to it or didn't want to hear it, they'll unsubscribe on their own. So never too early, but be thoughtful about people's time.
Wonderful advice. I wish we had more time, but we are almost there. Brian, what a great conversation. If somebody was going to dial into the last 60 seconds of this and find one golden nugget of a takeaway from all of what we've talked about and just your advice to entrepreneurs raising money right now, what would it be?
Yeah, I think I keep going back to this, like, why do you deserve to win? And I think that's a hard question for some people to stomach, because I do actually think, and I mean this in the nicest way, or at least in an honest way, not everybody is supposed to be an entrepreneur. And I think that if you really spend time studying entrepreneurs, and you study people who have built businesses over decades, and not just, enjoyed the fact that their LinkedIn says founder and CEO, entrepreneurship is very, very grueling, and it's very taxing. And there are a lot of better ways to make money, and there are a lot of better ways to make money faster than being an entrepreneur. And so if you are going to go down the path of being an entrepreneur, I really encourage you to ask yourself, what specific thing should you be building that no one else in the world can build? And how can you build a team around you to get to that goal as quickly as possible so that no one can beat you there? And I think if you continue to zoom yourself out of the day-to-day frustrations of fundraising, frustrations of the product not working, frustrations of not being able to hire people, and stay aligned to that North Star of why do we exist and what is our competitive advantage versus everyone else that exists that's building something like this in the world, I think you'll slowly iterate towards the right outcome.
What a great way to end the day. And we've coined a new term, team market fit. You've seen it here. Brian, thank you again so much for sharing all your insights and everything that's, being honest in this conversation with us today. So I really appreciate the time.
Of course, of course. Again, for anyone that listened, Brian at collidecap.com. I can't promise you I'll invest in your company, but I can absolutely give you perspective. And for those entrepreneurs that said I'm absolutely not about to back down, after I said what I said, that's how you should feel. And you should never let any investor tell you off your path, and keep pushing.
Amazing. Well, thank you again, Brian. And for those of you still on, we got a bunch of programs on the horizon, so keep a lookout for those up in our update. And we look forward to welcoming you all back online soon. Thanks again, Brian.
Thank you. Take care.